Coming up, we're going to have a look how you can meet governance, compliance, and organizational standards using Azure Policy for your apps, data, and infrastructure. I'm here with Ryan Willis from the Azure management team, and today we're going to talk about how you can leverage Azure Arc to apply policies to manage governance and regulatory compliance standards directly from Azure. So Ryan, what can you tell us a little bit about how Azure Arc can help us with that?
Definitely. So Azure Policy is a really fundamental part of Azure Resource Manager and every resource that Resource Manager is aware of. So, when you create a virtual machine in Azure, you can use Policy to make sure that people are creating machines that are connected to the right networks and aren't too big and too costly. And so the real benefit for hybrid machines with Azure Arc is that since Arc puts these resources, whether it's a Kubernetes cluster, SQL Server, Windows Linux server, into Azure Resource Manager, it becomes in scope for Azure Policy. And so that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for you to make a centralized, uniform compliance portal to see how are my machines configured, are they meeting our internal and regulatory compliance policies, and which policies in general are most and least compliant. It makes it a whole lot easier for you as a central IT organization to get an understanding of what's happening across your enterprise.
Now, this is awesome because when I talk to customers a lot, especially when they move from a on-prem only environment to a hybrid environment where they manage servers and other parts of their infrastructure in Azure, but also at other cloud providers at their edge locations, they start to use like group policies back in the days, right? And now, obviously, they need something which can a little bit more expand because not every server and every system can is connected to an Active Directory.
Yeah, definitely. And also, not every system runs Windows. So there's often security concerns about how your Linux machines are set up as well. There's also kind of the metadata level compliance things, like making sure that people have assigned cost center tags to each of their resources. So a lot of different things that people are trying to collect data on. And we built a really flexible platform that can handle compliance both inside a Kubernetes cluster or Windows server, looking at individual settings there, as well as kind of at that metadata level in Azure Resource Manager.
So that is pretty cool because I spoke to a lot of people who are in charge of compliance and security, and obviously they want to leverage these capabilities, which is delivered by Azure and Azure Arc in their environment to see if they're compliant, how is their state. And I know that we have a couple of awesome features there, how we can actually do that. So can you show us and tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, let's take a look at a demo. All right, so we are here in the Azure portal on the policy page where you're kind of seeing an overview of the current compliance status for all the policies in the subscription that I'm managing. So you'll see here 75% of all the resources I have are compliant. Every policy that applies to them checked out. But 25% need some help. So let's go take a look deeper on the compliance tab at all the policies we've assigned. You'll see here, there's tons of policies. They can cover really broad things, or they might be very specific. For example, there's one here about making sure that our IIS web servers running on Windows use TLS 1.2. That's important from a security standpoint, so let's drill in and take a look at which servers are non-compliant. For this specific policy, we have 3 servers that are in scope, 2 of which are non-compliant, 1 of which is compliant. And if we look into the details of this first server here and click through to understand why it's not compliant, we'll be able to get some information about what is actually happening to this machine. Great, so now that this is loaded, let's look at this reason over here, and you'll see that I've actually configured this machine to not use any TLS or SSL protocols. So this is a very non-compliant machine, but all that information is provided here for me to understand and go back to the owner of that machine and say, hey, you've got to fix that. We also have a machine here that runs a database server and might have been repurposed or something, but it's currently not actually running IIS, but it got flagged by this policy anyways. And we have a solution for that. You can go through and create exemptions if you have a machine which is known to be vulnerable or non-compliant and you need to just give it a temporary exemption for that, or it can be permanent if something was just misclassified and is coming up as in scope when it really shouldn't be. So I'll just mark here that this is no longer a public-facing web server so that the next time we look at compliance, this machine won't show up as non-compliant. So, it's a nice platform here that I can go one place and see all of my compliance data for these server settings across Azure, other clouds, and on-prem. But let's also, take a look at policies that work at the Azure level. So the previous policy was looking at OS settings, but this one here, Enable Azure Monitor for VMs, is saying that in order for our organization to properly monitor all of our resources, we want to make sure we automatically deploy the monitoring agent to every server. Here we see that there are a couple servers that did not have the monitoring agent installed. So we can go and create a remediation task where we say, here are my policy that deploys the Linux monitoring agents to those Linux servers. And I'm going to go and double check that all these servers do not currently have it installed. And if they don't, we'll automatically push out an extension with that agent and configuration to those servers. So that's a really nice way to help kind of automate things in Azure as well and get the compliance reporting out of whether or not the automation was successful and these machines are properly protected. So let's take a look at definitions now. There's a ton of built-in definitions in Azure to help you get started with policy. We've got everything from operational things like checking if certificates are expiring to security and regulatory compliance. So if you're held to a specific regulatory standard, you can go and assign some of these benchmarks to your Azure subscription so that you get some monitoring on some of the key controls that your auditor might be curious about. You'll also see a similar experience for this in Azure Security Center if you prefer to use that interface. You can also create your own policies. So if there's something that you want to monitor and with compliance and it's not already available, you can author your own using a very easy to use JSON format. And if you have existing group policies and you want to go and actually convert those to Azure policies, so you get centralized reporting for both domain joined and non-domain joined servers, then you can actually convert your group policies into Azure policies, upload them here, and assign it to those machines, which should be in scope. So that's a great option if you've already invested in things like your own internal baselines or maybe some custom settings for specific applications, and you don't want to have to recreate that yourself. Just convert, upload, assign, and off you go.
No, this is awesome. You showed so many awesome things right now. I just really need to quickly recap what you just showed me. So first of all, you can obviously leverage Azure policy to make sure that your Azure environment is configured in the right way. And with Azure policy guest configuration, we can do that for the operating systems running inside Azure virtual machines. And now with Azure Arc, we can basically take that and extend this to machines running outside of Azure. And I think one of the cool things you just showed me was also that we already have definitions out there and policies for you out there built into the Azure platform, which I just can go and get started with it.
Absolutely, yep. And it's not only limited to servers as well. So if you're running like Kubernetes clusters, you can set up policies to make sure that your Kubernetes containers are not exposing ports they shouldn't or are using approved images. It's a really flexible platform and it's designed to work for any resource that works with Azure Resource Manager.
So if I'm in security and compliance, I really have the chance to really get, first of all, the overview about my environment, what is going on. I don't need to check every resource. I really get that overview. And I can also assign my policy. I want to have making sure that inside my organization, everything is compliant.
Yep.
So one thing I want to talk about is now for IT pros, right? So obviously we had a look at it now as a responsible for compliance. I have this overview about my environment. Now I know that with Azure Resource Manager and Azure Arc, we also get role-based access control. So for example, not every admin obviously has access to the full view of Azure policy and all the subscriptions. How would they basically now leverage these policies, and how can they make sure that their servers in this example are configured and compliant?
Yeah, great question. Let's take a look at a demo here. So I'm pulling up the Azure portal again, but this time we'll actually head into an Arc server. And a similar experience exists for Kubernetes as well as Azure resources. But when you open up the server, on the left side in the navigation tabs, you'll see one that says policy. Now the view here is pretty much identical to what we just showed for the organization-wide view. But the policies you see are scoped to just those that are applicable to this machine. So you'll get a quick view as an IT pro as to what you're being measured on and how you're currently doing for each of these areas of compliance. So if you need to drill into one of these, you can go and figure out, again, why am I compliant or not? And you could, of course, use this information in preparation for your next audit so that when it comes time to measure whether or not your servers are ready, you'll already have a good idea that's regularly updated every single day with the latest information.
Pretty cool. Again, I really feel that this really fits the whole picture where if you're responsible for compliance, you really can push out these policies. And if you're a server admin and you want to know if you're actually compliant, it's super easy for you to use Azure Arc and go to the Azure portal and basically see the policies which are assigned to my servers and if I'm compliant to it. So you also mentioned, I think that obviously, if I already have group policies in my environment, there is a way to actually convert these to Azure policies. So I think that is absolutely a great solution. And I'm sure we have now a lot of interest from people, especially if you're in charge of compliance and security. So where would people go to learn more about this?
So we have some documentation in the Azure Arc docs on how to get started with policy. Look for some quick starts and tutorials there. There's also a few examples on the Azure Arc Jumpstart repo. And if you actually go to the Azure policy section in the portal, there is a getting started section, which has 6 recommended policies to get started with, which cover things like tag governance, enable Azure Monitor for VMs like I demonstrated, and a few others. So definitely check those out. They'll help you get started. And from there, you can learn the skills you need to expand to cover everything you're trying to measure compliance of.
Thank you very much, Ryan. This was really helpful. And for you who are watching, if you want to learn more about hybrid architectures and Azure Arc and how you can build your cloud environment, check out the Cloud Adoption Framework in our Azure Architecture Center.